U.S. President Donald Trump's key advisors have presented him with a plan to end Russia's war in Ukraine if he wins the presidential election, scheduled to take place later this year. According to retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, the strategy involves pressuring Ukraine to enter peace talks by threatening to withhold U.S. weapons and warning Russia of increased U.S. support for Ukraine if they refuse to negotiate. Fred Fleitz, another advisor to Trump, said, and this is a quote, "I'm not claiming that he, meaning Trump, agreed with it or agrees with every word of it, but we were pleased to get the feedback we did." Some experts have expressed concern that the plan by Trump's advisors could give Moscow the upper hand in talks. Trump spokesperson Stephen Chung said only statements made by Trump or the authorized members of his campaign should be deemed official. Trump has repeatedly stated that a top priority in his second term will be to quickly negotiate an end to the Russia-Ukraine war. Trump's spokesperson also said, and this is a quote, "The war between Russia and Ukraine never would have happened if Donald Trump were president. So sad." On the other hand, Kremlin has said that any peace plan proposed by a possible future Trump administration would have to reflect the reality on the ground. Kremlin added that Russian President Vladimir Putin is open to negotiations. Russia invaded neighboring Ukraine in February of 2022, and since then, tens of thousands have died on both sides, making this the bloodiest fighting in Europe since World War II. The U.S. has spent more than $70 billion on military aid for Ukraine since Moscow's invasion. President Biden has consistently pushed for more Ukraine aid, and his administration's support eventual ascension to NATO. Earlier in June, Biden and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky signed a 10-year bilateral security agreement. Putin said this month that the war could end if Ukraine agreed to drop its ambitions to join NATO and hand over eastern and southern provinces claimed by Russia. All right, for more on this, we are being joined by Peter Kuznick, professor of history and director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University, for more analysis on this story. Peter, thank you for joining us again on WION. So the likelihood of former President Donald Trump pushing for these strategies that his advisors are talking about regarding Ukraine and Russia, what are the likelihood, and do you think that he might take this advice if he does become president?
Well, you have to remember that Trump is rather unpredictable. However, this plan does seem to be in line with a lot of things that Trump has said. Trump has criticized the war from the beginning and criticized the U.S. support for Ukraine. Trump also has been saying recently that Putin was provoked into doing this by NATO expansion up to Russia's doorstep and by the prospect of Ukraine joining NATO. So this plan that's been put forward is not that out of the box compared to what others have been calling for. Putin himself has been calling for something along these lines, although Putin's demands are a little more expansive. But there's also a recent plan put forth by Xi Jinping and by Lula from Brazil, a 10-point plan, which is along these lines: freeze the battlefield where it is, no Ukraine into NATO, and sit down and negotiate an enduring peace, which includes security guarantees for Ukraine. So could Trump do this? Yes, this is certainly within the realm of possibility for Donald Trump.
And Peter, some are asking whether or not the former president's advisors' strategies would help in ending the conflict, given Kremlin's stance, which, as you mentioned, is not very far off from what these advisors are saying. Or do you think that the two sides would lean more towards that Chinese and Brazilian plan?
I think that what we need to do is get them to sit down and talk. They need to negotiate. What's missing right now is any semblance of diplomacy. And so we need to get them in the room together, let them hammer out a final agreement, or at least a ceasefire and an agreement for the near future. The killing is going on, the destruction is going on, and the threat of a broader war is growing by the day with the use of Ukraine's use of U.S. weapons to attack in Crimea and the counter position by Putin and his top advisors, we are getting closer and closer to World War III. So there has to be a sense of urgency. I don't want to see us wait until November or January. If Trump got elected and got into office, we might not even be here by then. So we need to sit down and negotiate now. We need Guterres to set up a summit meeting and peace negotiations, and we need to get to the negotiating table as quickly as possible. But the irony, and I think it's important to point out, while Trump, in my opinion, is more reasonable when it comes to Ukraine, he's more of a hawk than Biden is when it comes to supporting Israel or when it comes to his anti-China policies. So he might actually be a step in the right direction and a voice of sanity and reason when it comes to Ukraine. But I see him as being even more dangerous when it comes to supporting Israel blindly and when it comes to attacking China. So what we gain on one front, we might lose on the other two, but we need to move quickly toward diplomacy on Ukraine. And Trump's advisors seem to be urging that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's mentioned that a few times in interviews as well. Well, we'll be watching very soon. Peter Kuznick, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for joining me this morning.
My pleasure. Thank you.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.